The stagecoach rattled to a stop, and Lydia Carver's hands trembled as she gripped her carpet bag. She'd fled one monster. Would she find another waiting? When Cole Maddox stepped from the shadows, tall and scarred, her breath caught. His eyes held storms she couldn't read. "Mrs. Carver," he drawled, voice like whiskey and smoke. "I don't bite, unless asked." Her heart hammered. Was that a promise or a warning? Stay with us to see if Lydia finds safety or another nightmare. Comment your city so we know how far this story travels. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly as Lydia Carver pressed her face against the stagecoach window, watching the endless prairie roll past like an ocean of grass and broken dreams. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, gaunt, a 23-year-old woman who looked 40 from the weight of secrets she carried. The bruises on her wrists had faded to yellow, but the memories hadn't. They never would. "Whoa there!" The driver's shout jolted her as the coach lurched to a stop, throwing her against the worn leather seat. Dust billowed through the window, coating her already travel-stained dress with another layer of grit. She'd been on the road for 11 days, crossing half the country to reach a man she'd never met, answering an advertisement that had seemed like her only way out. Rancher-seeking wife must be strong, honest, and willing to work. No questions about the past. Cole Maddox, Bitterroot Valley, Montana Territory. No questions about the past. Those 5 words had been her salvation, her lifeline, thrown across 1,000 miles of desperation. Lydia had written back that same night, her hand shaking so badly the ink had smeared. She'd lied about only one thing. She'd said she was strong. The truth was she was broken into so many pieces she wasn't sure she'd ever be whole again. "Miss, this is your stop." The driver's weathered face appeared at the window, not unkind, but weary. He'd seen too many women like her, running from something, running toward hope that might be just another form of hell. Lydia nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. She gathered her carpet bag, everything she owned fit into one small, battered case, and accepted the driver's hand as she stepped down into the dusty street of Bitterroot Valley. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street stretched before her, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. A general store, a saloon already emanating the sour smell of whiskey despite the early hour, a church with a crooked steeple, and a handful of other structures whose purposes she couldn't immediately discern. A few people moved along the wooden sidewalks, their curious glances sliding over her like hands she wanted to slap away. "You the mail-order bride?" A woman's voice, sharp with judgment, cut through the afternoon heat. Lydia turned to see a severe-looking matron in black bombazine, her mouth pursed like she'd been sucking lemons. "For Cole Maddox?" Yes, ma'am." Lydia's voice came out smaller than she'd intended, and she hated herself for it. She'd promised herself she'd be different here, stronger, but old habits died hard. The woman sniffed. "Well, I suppose you'll do, though what Cole wants with another wife after what happened to the first one, I can't imagine." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Another wife. The advertisement hadn't mentioned a first wife, hadn't mentioned what happened to her. Before Lydia could respond, before she could ask the 1,000 questions suddenly screaming in her mind, a shadow fell across her. She looked up and up, into the face of a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. Cole Maddox stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, dressed in worn denim and a shirt that had seen better days. But it wasn't his size that made Lydia's breath catch. It was his face. The left side was marked by a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a pale line that spoke of violence and survival. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, gray and storm-filled, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her want to run. She took an involuntary step backward, and something flickered in those gray eyes, understanding, perhaps, or resignation. "Mrs. Carver." His voice was low, a rumble like distant thunder. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. "I'm Cole Maddox. I appreciate you making the journey." The formality of his words contrasted sharply with the raw masculinity of his presence. Lydia opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Mr. Maddox." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the right side where the scar didn't reach. "I told you in my letters to call me Cole. We're to be married after all." Married. The word felt like a trap closing around her, but what choice did she have? She had $17 to her name, no family she could turn to, and nowhere to go if she climbed back on that stagecoach. She'd made her choice when she'd answered that advertisement. Now she had to live with it. Cole, she managed, and his name felt strange on her tongue. Let me take that. He reached for her carpet bag, and Lydia flinched so violently she nearly dropped it. His hand froze in midair, and for a long moment they stood there, a tableau of fear and restraint, while the town watched. Sorry, Lydia whispered, shame burning her cheeks. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... No need to apologize. Cole's voice was gentle, carefully neutral. He lowered his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement. You've had a long journey. I imagine you're tired. The woman in black made a disapproving sound. Cole Maddox, you can't take her out to that ranch without proper vows spoken. It isn't decent. Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You're right, Mrs. Henderson. Reverend Mitchell's still in town? In his office, where he should be. Then we'll go speak with him. Cole looked back at Lydia, and she saw the question in his eyes. Are you ready for this? Can you do this? Lydia thought of her step-uncle Edmund, of his meaty hands and bourbon breath, of the night she'd fled through a window with nothing but the clothes on her back and the money she'd stolen from his drawer. She thought of the weeks she'd spent hiding, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings, always looking over her shoulder. She thought of the alternative to this moment, going back or starving or something worse. Yes, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's go see the Reverend. The church was cooler inside, shadows pooling in the corners like prayers that had lost their way. Reverend Mitchell was a thin man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly, palsy or drink, Lydia couldn't tell. He looked between them, seeming to measure something beyond their words. You're certain about this, Miss Carver? You've only just arrived. I'm certain. The lie came easily now. She'd been lying for so long to so many people. What was one more? The ceremony was brief, perfunctory. Cole produced a simple gold band that was slightly too large for her finger. His hands were warm and calloused when he slid it on, his touch as gentle as his voice. With this ring I thee wed. The words seemed to echo in the small space, binding her to him with cords she couldn't see but could feel tightening around her chest. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them man and wife, Cole didn't kiss her. He simply nodded, as if they'd concluded a business transaction, and offered her his arm. Lydia took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt, and tried not to think about what came next. His wagon was waiting outside, a sturdy affair drawn by two horses that looked as weathered and capable as their owner. Cole helped her up onto the seat with the same careful gentleness, never gripping too hard, never moving too fast. It was almost more unnerving than aggression would have been. She didn't know what to do with kindness. They rode out of town in silence, the wagon wheels creaking a rhythm that matched Lydia's thundering heart. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, big sky country that made her feel both exposed and invisible. She'd grown up in Philadelphia, where buildings blocked the sun and you could disappear into crowds. Here, there was nowhere to hide. The ranch is about an hour out, Cole said, breaking the silence. I've got 300 acres, mostly cattle, some horses. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid. Built it myself 5 years back. Lydia nodded, unsure what response he expected. I want you to understand something. Cole's hands were steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. That thing Mrs. Henderson said about my first wife. Her name was Sarah. She died 3 years ago. Fever took her in the winter. Wasn't anything... His voice caught, and he cleared his throat. Wasn't anything suspicious about it, if that's what you're wondering. I wasn't, Lydia started, but the truth was she had been wondering. Exactly that. It's all right. You've got a right to know who you married. He glanced at her, those gray eyes seeing too much. I don't know what you're running from, Lydia, and I meant what I said in my letter. I won't ask. But I want you to know you're safe with me. I don't hold with hurting women. Never have, never will. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Lydia want to cry. She'd heard similar promises before, honeyed words that turned to poison, but there was something different in Cole's tone, a quiet certainty, a lack of performance. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was simply stating a fact. "Thank you," she managed. They fell back into silence, but it was less oppressive now. Lydia watched the landscape change as they traveled, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with cattle. In the distance, mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley where a creek cut a silver line through the grass. The main house was indeed solid, built of logs chinked with mud, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A barn stood nearby, painted red and weather-beaten. Corrals held horses and cattle, and Lydia could see chickens scratching in the yard. "Home," Cole said simply, and something in his voice made Lydia look at him. His expression had softened, the harsh lines of his face easing into something almost tender as he looked at his land. This place meant something to him. It was more than property. It was sanctuary. Could it be sanctuary for her too? Cole brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then came around to help Lydia. This time she was ready for his touch, and she managed not to flinch when his hand circled her waist to lift her down. He was strong. She could feel it in the easy way he moved her, but he set her on her feet with the same careful gentleness he'd shown all day. "Let me show you inside," he said, grabbing her carpet bag from the wagon bed. The house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Lydia's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself in a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and furniture, handmade but sturdy, was arranged with a bachelor's practicality rather than any sense of decoration. Everything was clean, almost Spartan. No photographs, no mementos, nothing personal except a rifle mounted over the fireplace and a worn Bible on a side table. "Bedroom's through there," Cole said, pointing to a door on the left. "I'll sleep out here on the settle for now. Until—" He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. "Until you're comfortable." Lydia stared at him. In all her imaginings of this moment, in all her fears about what her wedding night might bring, she had never considered this. That he would give her space, that he would give her choice. "You don't have to—" she started. "I do," Cole interrupted gently. "Lydia, I can see you're scared. I don't know why, and I won't ask. But I'm not going to—" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "This is your home now. You need to feel safe here. We've got time to figure out the rest." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She had cried enough tears to last a lifetime. "That's very kind of you." "It's not kindness, it's decent behavior, which I know isn't as common as it should be." He set her carpet bag down by the bedroom door. "Why don't you rest? I've got to see to the horses. Check on the stock. There's water in the pitcher, bread and cheese in the cupboard if you're hungry. Make yourself at home." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Lydia stood alone in the center of the room, clutching her hands together to stop them from shaking. The gold band on her finger caught the light, a tangible reminder that she was married to a man she didn't know, in a place she'd never been, with no way back to the life she'd left behind. But that life had been a nightmare. Whatever this was, it had to be better. She picked up her carpet bag and carried it into the bedroom. It was small but clean, with a bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser, and a washstand. One window looked out over the valley, offering a view of the mountains. Lydia set her bag on the bed and sank down beside it, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd made it. Against all odds, through all the miles and all the fear, she'd made it to Montana. She was married. She was safe. Wasn't she? The memory of Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in her mind. Another wife. After what happened to the first one. Cole had said Sarah died of fever, but why had Mrs. Henderson made it sound suspicious? What did the townspeople think had happened? And more importantly, what would they think when Edmund found her? Because he would find her. Edmund always found what he was looking for, and he'd been looking for her for months. The question wasn't if he would come, but when. And what would happen when he arrived, spinning his lies, telling everyone she was his wayward niece who'd stolen from him and run away? Who would believe her word against his? Lydia lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The quilt smelled like lavender and sunshine, like someone had cared enough to hang it out to dry on a summer day. The thought brought a fresh wave of tears, and this time she let them fall. She cried for the girl she'd been before Edmund, for the innocence she'd lost, for the years she'd spent surviving instead of living. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, but strangely lighter. She sat up, wiping her face with her sleeve, and looked around the room that was now hers. There was a small mirror over the dresser, and she stood to examine her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, thin, pale, with dark circles under eyes that had seen too much. But she was alive. She was free, at least for now. And she was married to a man who said he didn't bite unless asked. That strange statement echoed in her mind. What had he meant by it? Was it a joke? A warning? Or something else entirely? A knock on the door made her jump. "Lydia?" Cole's voice, careful and quiet. "I'm fixing some supper. Will you join me?" She took a breath, steadying herself. This was her life now. She needed to start living it. "Yes, I'll be right out." When she emerged, she found Cole at the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled surprisingly good. He'd rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars, the signs of a life lived hard. He looked over his shoulder when she entered, and something like relief crossed his face. "Just stew," he said. "Nothing fancy. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." "It smells wonderful." Lydia moved to the table, unsure whether to offer help. In her step-uncle's house, she'd done all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the work. Was that expected here too? As if reading her thoughts, Cole said, "Why don't you sit? You've been traveling for days. Tomorrow we can talk about how we'll divide the work, figure out a routine, but tonight, just rest." Lydia sat, folding her hands in her lap. She watched Cole work, noticed the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence. He wasn't a large man in the way her step-uncle had been. Edmund was all bulk and brutality. Cole was lean strength, controlled power. The difference should have been comforting, but Lydia had learned that men could hurt you regardless of their size. Cole ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, along with thick slices of bread and butter. He sat across from her, bowed his head for a brief, silent prayer, then picked up his spoon. "Eat." The stew was simple but good, beef and vegetables seasoned with herbs. Lydia realized she was starving. She couldn't remember the last real meal she'd eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, not wanting to seem desperate, but Cole was focused on his own food and didn't appear to be judging her. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally, needing to fill the silence. "You said you've had it 5 years?" Cole nodded, swallowing before he spoke. "Built it from nothing. Bought the land with money I saved from working cattle drives. Spent 2 years building the house and barn. Started with 20 head of cattle. Now I've got near 200. It's a good life. Hard work, but honest." "And you manage it all yourself?" "I've got 2 hands who come during busy seasons. Branding, roundup. Rest of the time it's just me." He paused, then added carefully, "Just us now." Just us. The phrase hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and peril. Lydia took another bite of stew, buying time to compose her thoughts. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I didn't figure you were. Woman who'd come all this way by herself isn't afraid of much." His gray eyes met hers across the table. "But you are afraid of something." It wasn't a question, and Lydia didn't pretend otherwise. "Yes. The past you don't want to talk about." "Yes." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "All right, but Lydia, if trouble comes looking for you, I need to know. I can't protect you from something I don't see coming." Protect her. The word was foreign in her vocabulary. No one had ever protected her. Not her mother, who died when Lydia was 12. Not her father, who drank himself to death 2 years later, leaving her in the care of his brother Edmund. Certainly not Edmund himself, who'd seen her as property to be used and eventually sold to the highest bidder. She'd protected herself, she'd run, she'd survived. And now this stranger, her husband, was offering something she'd never had. It terrified her more than Edmund ever had. "I understand," she said finally, though she wasn't sure she did. Wasn't sure she could trust it. Trust him. They finished the meal in silence. When Cole rose to clear the dishes, Lydia stood to help, but he waved her away. "Tomorrow. Tonight you need rest. It's been a hell of a day." It had been. Lydia returned to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. She could hear Cole moving around in the main room, the soft sounds of him settling in for the night. She changed into her nightgown, worn cotton that had been mended more times than she could count, and climbed into bed. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in months. The quilt was warm without being stifling. Outside her window, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the vast silence of the prairie night. It should have been peaceful. Instead, Lydia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because in her experience, kindness was just cruelty taking its time. Gentleness was just violence waiting for the right moment. And men who made promises were just liars who hadn't shown their true faces yet. But as the hours passed and nothing happened, no footsteps approaching her door, no demands, no expectations, a small, fragile hope began to bloom in her chest. Maybe Cole Maddox was different. Maybe this place could truly be a new beginning. Or maybe she was just a fool, trading one prison for another, one monster for a different kind. Only time would tell. And time, Lydia knew, had a way of revealing the truth that words concealed. She just had to survive long enough to see it. She'd gotten good at surviving. It was living she'd forgotten how to do. As sleep finally claimed her, her last thought was of Cole's words. "I don't bite unless asked." In her dreams, she wondered what would happen if she asked. Wondered what it would be like to want a man's touch instead of fearing it. Wondered if she'd ever heal enough to find out. The answer, like so much else in her new life, remained uncertain. But for the first time in years, Lydia fell asleep without her hand wrapped around a knife. And that perhaps was something. Morning came too early, announced by a rooster's crow that pierced through Lydia's uneasy sleep like a blade. She jolted upright, heart hammering, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room. Then memory crashed back. Montana, the ranch, Cole Maddox, her husband. Pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Lydia could hear movement in the main room, the clatter of a pan, the creak of floorboards under heavy boots. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn dress from yesterday, ran her fingers through her tangled hair, and steeled herself before opening the bedroom door. Cole stood at the stove, his back to her, already dressed for the day in denim and a faded blue shirt. The coffee pot was percolating, filling the air with a rich aroma that made Lydia's stomach growl. He must have heard her emerge because he spoke without turning around. "Coffee's almost ready. Eggs and bacon suit you?" "Yes, thank you." Lydia moved to the table, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. She'd left her boots in the bedroom and now felt oddly vulnerable without them, as if she might need to run at any moment. Cole glanced over his shoulder and his eyes caught on her feet. Something flickered in his expression, concern, maybe, or understanding. "Floor's cold in the mornings. You'll want your boots." It wasn't a criticism, just an observation, but Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks anyway. "I'll remember." "No hurry." He turned back to the stove, cracking eggs into the skillet with practiced ease. "We've got time." Time. Lydia wasn't used to having time. In Edmund's house, every moment had been measured, accounted for, demanded. She'd moved through her days like a prisoner counting down to an execution that never quite came. The idea that she could simply sit here, that no one was shouting for her, that breakfast would be served to her instead of demanded from her, felt surreal. Cole brought 2 plates to the table and set one in front of her. Eggs, bacon, toasted bread. Simple food, but more than she'd had in months. He poured coffee for both of them, then settled into the chair across from her with a sigh that spoke of a man already tired though the day had barely begun. "Didn't sleep much," he said, answering her unspoken question. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, and Lydia noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "The settle's shorter than I remembered." Guilt twisted in Lydia's chest. "You could have, the bed is large enough that—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. What was she suggesting? That they share the bed? The thought made her skin crawl. Not because of Cole specifically, but because the idea of sleeping beside any man brought back memories she'd rather forget. "No," Cole said firmly. "We'll figure something else out. Maybe I'll move my things to the barn loft for now. It's comfortable enough up there, and it's not like the settle is any better. I don't want to put you out of your own house." Cole's gray eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she couldn't quite name. Respect maybe, or simply an acknowledgement of her worth as a person rather than property. Lydia, you're my wife. This is your house now too, and I meant what I said yesterday. You need to feel safe here. That starts with having your own space until you decide otherwise. The words should have been comforting, but they only deepened Lydia's confusion. She didn't know how to exist in a world where men kept their promises, where boundaries were respected, where she had any say in what happened to her own body. It was like learning a new language, one she'd never expected to speak. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks against plates, and the distant sounds of the ranch waking up, cattle lowing, horses nickering, birds singing their morning chorus. When they finished, Lydia stood to clear the dishes, but Cole was already on his feet. "I'll show you around," he said. "Give you a sense of the place, what needs doing. Then you can decide how you want to spend your days." Decide. Another foreign concept, but Lydia nodded and followed him outside. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of grass and animals and earth. The sun was climbing higher, burning off the last wisps of mist that clung to the valley. Cole led her first to the chicken coop, where a dozen hens scratched and clucked, eyeing them with suspicious golden eyes. "Eggs need collecting every morning," Cole said. "Sometimes twice a day if the hens are feeling productive. They're temperamental creatures, but they'll get used to you." Lydia watched the chickens, remembering the flock her mother had kept before she died. She'd collected eggs then, a child's chore that had felt like an adventure. The memory brought an unexpected ache to her chest. "I can do that," she said quietly. Cole nodded and moved on to the barn. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay and horse. 4 stalls lined one wall, 3 of them occupied. Cole stopped at the first stall where a bay mare thrust her head over the door, nickering softly. "This is Daisy. She's gentle as they come. If you want to learn to ride, she's the one to learn on." He stroked the mare's nose with a tenderness that surprised Lydia. "The roan next to her is Copper. He's mine. And the gray at the end is Judge. He's old but still sound. Used him for years before I got Copper." "I've never ridden," Lydia admitted. "No time like the present to learn. Ranch this size, you'll need to know how. Can't walk everywhere." Cole opened Daisy's stall and led the mare out, his movements easy and confident. "Come here. Let her smell you." Lydia approached hesitantly. The horse was enormous up close, all muscle and warmth and power. But when Daisy lowered her head to sniff at Lydia's outstretched hand, her breath warm and soft, something in Lydia's chest loosened. The mare's dark eyes were kind, patient, trusting in a way Lydia had forgotten was possible. "She likes you," Cole said, and there was approval in his voice. "Animals are good judges of character." Before Lydia could respond to that loaded statement, a shout echoed from outside the barn. Both she and Cole turned toward the sound, and Lydia's blood ran cold at what she saw. A man was riding hard toward the ranch, his horse lathered and blowing. Even from a distance, Lydia could see the fury in his posture, the aggressive cant of his body, and she knew, with the certainty of prey that has been hunted too long, exactly who he was. Edmund. "Lydia!" His voice carried across the yard, thick with false concern. "Lydia Carver, thank God. I've been searching everywhere for you." Cole stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lydia. It was a subtle movement, but she felt it like a shield. "Can I help you?" Edmund reined his horse to a stop in a cloud of dust. He was exactly as Lydia remembered, heavy-set, red-faced, with small eyes that glittered like a pig's. He wore expensive clothes, the kind meant to impress, and his whole demeanor screamed entitlement and authority. When he saw Lydia half hidden behind Cole, his expression twisted into something that might have been relief if you didn't look too closely. But Lydia looked closely. She saw the rage beneath the mask. "Thank heavens," Edmund said, dismounting with a grunt. He moved toward Lydia, arms outstretched as if to embrace her. "My dear niece, you've had us all so worried. When you disappeared without a word—" "Stop right there." Cole's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute command. Edmund froze mid-step, his eyes narrowing as he took in Cole's size, his stance, the scar on his face that marked him as a man who'd survived violence. "I beg your pardon?" Edmund's tone dripped with offended dignity. "This is my niece, and I've come to take her home." "She is home." Cole's hand moved to rest on his hip, where Lydia now noticed he wore a pistol she hadn't seen earlier. And she's not your niece anymore. She's my wife. The words hit Edmund like a physical blow. His face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Wife? That's impossible. Lydia is promised to Calvin Thornton, a respectable businessman in Philadelphia. The arrangements were made months ago. I made no such promise. Lydia's voice came out stronger than she expected, surprising even herself. She stepped out from behind Cole, forcing herself to meet Edmund's eyes despite every instinct screaming at her to run. You made arrangements, without my consent, without my knowledge until a week before he was supposed to… She stopped, unable to finish. Couldn't say aloud what Edmund had planned for her. Edmund's expression shifted, the mask of concern sliding away to reveal the monster beneath. You ungrateful little thief. You stole from me, ran away in the middle of the night like a common criminal. I've spent a fortune tracking you across half the country, and this is how you repay my generosity? Generosity? The word exploded from Lydia before she could stop it. Years of fear and silence shattered in that moment, and suddenly she couldn't hold back the truth anymore. You locked me in my room for days at a time. You took every penny I earned from sewing. You sold me to a man 3 times my age who wanted… Her voice broke. You called it generosity? I clothed you, fed you, gave you a roof over your head after your father drank himself into an early grave. Edmund took a step forward, and this time Cole moved to block him completely. You owed me, Lydia, and you will repay that debt one way or another. She owes you nothing. Cole's voice had gone cold, dangerous in a way that made Lydia shiver despite the morning heat. And if you take another step toward her, we're going to have a problem. Edmund laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, boy. That girl is a liar and a thief. She'll rob you blind and disappear one night. Mark my words. Funny, Cole said, his tone conversational despite the tension crackling in the air. She's been here less than a day and hasn't stolen a thing. But you ride onto my property making threats and demands. So who's the real problem here? For a moment, Lydia thought Edmund might actually attack them both. She could see it in the coiling of his muscles, the way his hand twitched toward his belt where he always kept a knife. But then he seemed to recalculate, his expression shifting back to false reasonableness. I can see you've been taken in by her lies, Edmund said. But I'm a patient man. I'll give you time to see the truth. When she steals from you, when she betrays you, you'll remember this conversation. And when that day comes, I'll be waiting to take her back to face justice. Get off my land, Cole said quietly. And don't come back. Edmund's smile was cold and cruel. We'll see about that. I have friends in this territory, influential friends. They'll be very interested to hear about a stolen bride and the money she took that doesn't belong to her. He mounted his horse with surprising agility for a man his size, yanking the reins hard enough to make the animal toss its head. This isn't over, Lydia. You think you can run from your obligations, but the law is on my side. I'll see you back where you belong, even if I have to drag you there myself. He rode off at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust and implied threats hanging in the air. Lydia stood frozen, watching him disappear over the rise, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every instinct she'd developed over years of survival screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear before Edmund could make good on his promises. Lydia. Cole's voice broke through her panic. She turned to find him watching her with those storm-gray eyes, his expression unreadable. How much of what he said was true? The question hit her like a slap. Of course. Of course Cole would believe Edmund. Men always believed other men, especially men with money and power and the kind of authority that came from being respectable. Why should Cole be any different? I did steal money, Lydia said, forcing the words out past the constriction in her throat. $47 from his desk drawer. It was the only way I could afford to leave. And I ran in the middle of the night because it was the only chance I had. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze even though it terrified her. So yes, I'm a thief. If you want to send me back with him, I won't fight you. But I won't go willingly either. Cole was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read something written there in a language he didn't quite understand. Then he did something that shocked Lydia to her core. He smiled. Not the ghost of a smile she'd seen before, but a real one, though it was edged with something darker. "Good," he said simply. Lydia blinked. "Good? You've got spirit. You'll need it out here." Cole turned and started walking back toward the house, leaving Lydia to scramble after him. "And for what it's worth, I don't consider taking back what's yours to be theft. If you earned that money, it belonged to you." But Edmund said, "Edmund is a bully and a liar." Cole stopped at the porch steps, turning to face her. "I've met plenty of men like him. They use law and respectability as weapons to control people weaker than themselves. He doesn't care about $47. He cares about losing his property." "That's what you were to him, wasn't it? Property." The accuracy of the statement drove the breath from Lydia's lungs. She nodded, unable to speak. Cole's expression hardened. "Well, you're not property. You're a person. And he was right about one thing. This isn't over. Men like him don't let go easily. He'll be back, and he'll try to use the law to get what he wants." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "So I need to know everything. What exactly did Edmund do to you? What did he plan for you? And what can he actually prove in a court of law?" Lydia's legs suddenly felt too weak to hold her. She sank down onto the porch steps, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could physically hold the memories at bay. But Cole had asked, and he deserved the truth. He'd promised to protect her, though she still didn't quite believe that promise. The least she could do was give him the full picture of what he was up against. "My father died when I was 14, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Edmund was his only brother. He took me in, told everyone he was being charitable, giving a poor orphan a home, and for the first few months it was bearable. He ignored me mostly, and I kept house for him, cooked, cleaned, did his laundry. It seemed like a fair exchange." Cole sat down beside her on the steps, not close enough to touch, but near enough that she could feel his presence, solid and steady. "What changed?" "I turned 16. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Suddenly, Edmund started noticing me, started commenting on how I looked, what I wore. He'd find excuses to touch me. My shoulder, my hair, my hand. Small things that could be explained away as avuncular affection, but I knew, I could see it in his eyes." A muscle ticked in Cole's jaw, but he said nothing, just listened. "I started taking in sewing to earn my own money," Lydia continued. "I thought if I could save enough, I could leave. Get a room somewhere, find work as a seamstress or a shop girl. But Edmund found out about the money. Said that since I lived under his roof, anything I earned belonged to him. He took every penny." She laughed bitterly. "That's when the locks appeared on my bedroom door. He'd lock me in for days sometimes, said it was for my own protection, that the city wasn't safe for a young woman alone. But I knew the truth. He was making sure I couldn't run." "Jesus," Cole breathed, and Lydia heard real anger in his voice. "Then 6 months ago, he told me about Calvin Thornton, said he'd found me a husband, a wealthy man who would provide for me the way Edmund could no longer afford to." Lydia's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against her knees to still them. "I met Thornton once. He was 60 years old, had buried 3 wives already. The way he looked at me—" She shuddered. "Edmund said the marriage was arranged, that Thornton had already paid him a substantial sum. I was to marry him within the month." "That's when you ran." "That's when I stole the money and climbed out my bedroom window at 2 in the morning." Lydia met Cole's eyes, needing him to understand. "I didn't have a choice. Thornton wanted—" "Edmund told me exactly what Thornton expected from a wife. He was very detailed about it, said I needed to understand my duties. I think he enjoyed watching me squirm." Cole's hands had curled into fists, and Lydia noticed his knuckles had gone white. "Where did you go?" "I hid in an abandoned warehouse for 2 days. Then I started moving, taking trains and coaches, never staying anywhere long. I lived in barns, empty buildings, anywhere I could find shelter. I used most of the money for travel and food, just trying to get far enough away that Edmund couldn't find me." She pulled the gold band off her finger, holding it up to the light. "I had $3 left when I saw your advertisement. I spent 2 of them on paper and postage for my reply." "And the last $1? "I still have it, sewn into the lining of my carpet bag. I told myself I'd always keep it, just in case I needed to run again." She looked at him, searching his face for judgment, for disgust, for any sign that he regretted bringing her here. "So now you know." I'm a thief who ran from an arranged marriage and has a vindictive man hunting her across the country. If you want to annul this marriage, I'll understand." Cole didn't answer immediately. He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the mountains in the distance. Lydia's heart sank. Of course he wanted her gone. What man would want a wife who brought this kind of trouble? But when Cole turned back to face her, his expression wasn't one of regret. It was determination, cold and hard as winter steel. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the same command she'd heard when he'd faced down Edmund. "First, you're going to stop talking about running. This is your home now, and you're not going anywhere unless you choose to. Second, Edmund doesn't get to terrorize you. Not here, not ever again. Third," he paused, and something that might have been humor flickered in his gray eyes. "Third, you're going to learn to shoot." Lydia stared at him. "What?" "Can't protect yourself if you're unarmed. Ranch this size, you need to know how to handle a gun anyway. Wolves, mountain lions, snakes, plenty of things that might need shooting. And if Edmund comes back—" Cole's smile was sharp as a blade. "Well, a woman has a right to defend her home." "You're serious." "As death." Cole held out his hand to help her up. "Now come on, we're losing daylight and you've got a lot to learn." Lydia took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, calloused, strong, without being crushing. For the first time since Edmund had appeared on the horizon, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't quite hope. She'd learned that hope was dangerous, but it was close. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Cole led her to the barn and retrieved 2 rifles from a locked cabinet she hadn't noticed before. He handed her the smaller of the 2, showing her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe before squeezing the trigger. "Never aim at something you don't intend to kill," he said seriously. "And never pull the trigger unless you're absolutely certain. Understood?" Lydia nodded, feeling the weight of the weapon in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, cold metal and smooth wood, dangerous, powerful. In Edmund's house, she'd been helpless, prey waiting for the predator to strike. But with this rifle in her hands, she was something else, something Edmund wouldn't expect. They spent the next hour in the valley behind the barn, Cole setting up targets, old bottles, a rusted bucket, a board with a crude circle drawn in charcoal. Lydia's first shots went wide, the recoil making her shoulder ache. But Cole was patient, adjusting her stance, correcting her grip, never touching her without asking permission first. "That's it," he said when she finally hit the bucket, sending it spinning. "You're getting it." By the time the sun reached its zenith, Lydia had hit more targets than she'd missed. Her shoulder would be bruised come morning, and her ears rang from the gunshots, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years, capable, strong, like she might actually survive whatever came next. They walked back to the house in companionable silence, Cole carrying both rifles easily. Lydia's mind was churning, processing everything that had happened in the span of a single morning. Edmund had found her. The nightmare she'd been running from had caught up. But instead of the world ending, instead of being dragged back to Philadelphia in chains, she was still here, still free. And she had a husband who'd faced down her monster without flinching. "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Cole glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Doing what?" "Helping me. Believing me. You don't know me. I could be exactly what Edmund said, a liar and a thief who'll rob you and disappear." "Could be," Cole agreed, "but you're not." "How can you be sure?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The scar on his face caught the light, a reminder that he'd survived his own battles, fought his own demons. "Because I've seen enough lies to recognize truth when I hear it. And because—" He hesitated, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "My first wife, Sarah. She came from a situation not unlike yours. Her father tried to sell her to settle a gambling debt. She ran, answered my advertisement, married me to escape him." Lydia's breath caught. "What happened?" "Her father came looking for her, just like Edmund came looking for you. Rode up to the ranch making demands, threatening legal action, saying all kinds of things about Sarah's character." Cole's expression had gone distant, lost in memory. "I believed her instead of him, stood between them. And you know what?" He backed down. Bullies always do when someone stands up to them. Sarah and I had 3 good years together before the fever took her. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. So am I. But that's why I know I'm doing the right thing here. Sarah taught me that sometimes the best thing a man can do is simply believe a woman when she tells him the truth. He started walking again, and Lydia hurried to keep pace. Besides, I told you in my advertisement, no questions about the past. I meant it. Whatever you did to survive, whatever choices you made, they're none of my concern. Who you are now, the life we build from here, that's what matters. They reached the house, and Cole propped the rifles by the door before heading to the kitchen. You must be starving. Let me fix us something. But Lydia caught his arm, stopping him. He looked down at where her hand rested on his sleeve, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. She'd initiated the touch, crossed that boundary of her own free will. Thank you, she said, putting every ounce of meaning she could into the words. For believing me. For standing up to Edmund. For teaching me to shoot. For all of it. Cole covered her hand with his, the touch gentle and brief. You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being, Lydia. That's just basic decency. Maybe it was. But in Lydia's experience, basic decency was rarer than gold and twice as valuable. She'd spent years without it, convinced she'd never find it. And now here it was, offered freely by a scarred rancher who'd married her sight unseen and asked for nothing in return except honesty. The afternoon passed in a blur of ordinary tasks that felt extraordinary because they were hers to choose. Lydia collected eggs from the henhouse while Cole tended the horses. She helped him mend a section of fence, learning how to string wire and secure posts. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and with each passing hour, Lydia felt some of the tension that had lived in her shoulders for years begin to ease. But as the sun started its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, unease crept back in. Edmund was out there somewhere, plotting his next move. He wouldn't give up. She knew him too well to believe that. He'd go to the sheriff, spin his story, make her out to be a criminal. And who would the law believe? A wealthy businessman from Philadelphia, or a runaway girl who admitted to stealing? You're thinking too hard, Cole observed. They were sitting on the porch, watching the light fade, each with a cup of coffee growing cold in their hands. I can practically hear the wheels turning in your head. He's going to cause trouble, Lydia said quietly. Edmund doesn't make empty threats. If he said he has influential friends, he does. He'll use them. Let him try. Cole's voice was calm, unbothered. We're married legal. I've got the certificate from Reverend Mitchell to prove it. And as for the theft, you took money you earned. That's not a crime in any court that matters. But Edmund will say I didn't earn it. He'll say I stole it from him. Then it'll be his word against yours, and you've got me to back you up. Cole looked at her, his gray eyes serious. I know you're scared, Lydia. You've got reason to be. But running and hiding didn't work. He found you anyway. So maybe it's time to stop running. Plant your feet, stand your ground, and fight. Fight. The word resonated in Lydia's chest like a bell. She'd been running for so long, survival had become her only strategy. But Cole was right. It hadn't worked. Edmund had tracked her across 1,000 miles. He'd found her when she'd thought she was finally safe. Running again would just start the cycle over. I don't know how to fight, she admitted. You're learning. Cole nodded toward the rifles propped by the door. You hit 7 out of 10 targets today. Give it a week, you'll be hitting 9 out of 10. That's fighting. Learning to protect yourself, to stand tall, to look your fear in the eye and say no more. That's all fighting is. And if the law sides with him, then we'll deal with it, together. Cole stood, stretching, his joints cracking. But I've got a feeling it won't come to that. Men like Edmund are used to people rolling over for them. They don't know what to do when someone pushes back. We push back hard enough, he'll find an easier target. Lydia wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that it could be that simple. But she'd seen Edmund destroy people who crossed him, had watched him use his money and connections to ruin lives. He'd done it to her father, grinding him down until the only escape was the bottom of a bottle. He'd do it to Cole too if given the chance. I should leave, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Before he destroys you like he destroyed everyone else who got in his way. You don't deserve that. Neither do you. Cole's voice was firm. And you're not leaving. We made vows, Lydia, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. This is the worst part, I reckon. But we'll get through it. You don't understand. I understand plenty. Cole crouched down in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. I understand you're terrified. I understand you think you're a burden, that you bring nothing but trouble. But here's what you don't understand. I chose this. I put that advertisement in the paper knowing full well that any woman desperate enough to answer might be running from something. I knew the risk, and I took it anyway. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Cole smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, warming them like sunlight through storm clouds. Because a ranch this big gets lonely. Because I'm tired of talking to cattle and horses. Because I saw something in your letter, the way you wrote about wanting a fresh start, about being willing to work hard for a chance at a better life. That took courage, Lydia, and courage is something I respect. He stood, offering her his hand. Now come on, let's get some supper in you. Tomorrow we'll ride into town, talk to the sheriff, get ahead of whatever story Edmund's planning to spin. We'll face this head on, together. Lydia took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked into the house side by side, she realized something had shifted between them. They were still strangers in many ways, still learning each other's edges and boundaries. But they were also allies now, united against a common enemy. And maybe, just maybe, they were becoming something else too. Something that felt dangerously close to friends. That night, after another simple meal shared in comfortable quiet, after Cole had moved his things to the barn loft despite Lydia's protests, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd stepped off that stagecoach terrified and alone. Now she had a home, a husband who believed her, and the beginnings of something she'd thought she'd never feel again. Hope. It was fragile, delicate as spun glass, and she was terrified of holding it too tightly lest it shatter. But it was there, glowing softly in her chest like an ember that might, with care and time, grow into a flame. Outside, she heard an owl calling, its haunting cry echoing across the valley. And somewhere out there in the darkness, Edmund was planning his next move. The battle wasn't over. It had barely begun. But for the first time in her life, Lydia wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. Dawn broke cold and gray, threatening rain. Lydia woke to the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance, a fitting accompaniment to the dread that had settled in her stomach overnight. Today they would ride into town, face the sheriff, and confront whatever lies Edmund had already spread. She dressed carefully in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and braided her hair with trembling fingers. Cole was already up, of course, moving around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. He looked up when she emerged, and something in his expression softened. "You look ready for battle," he said, pouring her coffee. "I feel like I'm walking to my own execution." "You're not." Cole set the cup in front of her, then leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Sheriff Dalton is a fair man. He won't make judgments without hearing both sides. And he knows me, knows I don't take up with criminals or liars." Lydia wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing what comfort she could from it. What if Edmund's already poisoned him against me? Then we'll unpoison him. Truth has a way of winning out, given the chance. Cole grabbed his own coffee and sat across from her. "But I won't lie to you, Lydia. This won't be easy. Edmund's got money and the kind of polish that makes people want to believe him. We'll need to be smart about this." "Smart how?" "We tell the truth, but we tell it strategically. You don't lead with the ugliest parts, you start with the facts. You were living with your uncle after your father died. He arranged a marriage you didn't want. You left. That's not illegal, no matter what Edmund claims." Cole took a long drink of his coffee. "The money's trickier, but we can argue you were owed wages for the work you did keeping his house. Even if that doesn't fly, $47 isn't enough to warrant extradition across territorial lines. Most sheriffs won't waste the resources." Lydia listened, amazed at how clearly Cole had thought this through. "You've dealt with this kind of thing before." "Not exactly, but I've seen enough of how the law works out here to know what matters and what doesn't." He stood, setting his cup in the basin. "Come on. The sooner we do this, the sooner it's done." The ride into town was tense and silent. Lydia sat rigid in the wagon seat, watching the landscape roll past without really seeing it. Her mind was a whirlwind of fears and possibilities, each worse than the last. What if the sheriff arrested her on the spot? What if Edmund had convinced him she was dangerous? What if they separated her from Cole and she never saw him again? Cole seemed to sense her spiral because he reached over and covered her hand with his, the touch brief but grounding. "Breathe, Lydia. We'll get through this." She tried to believe him. Bitterroot Valley looked different in the gray morning light, smaller, more exposed. The few people on the street stopped to stare as Cole drove past, and Lydia could feel their eyes like brands on her skin. News traveled fast in small towns. They all knew by now that Cole Maddox had married some stranger who'd arrived on the stagecoach. They probably also knew Edmund had shown up claiming she was a thief and a runaway. The sheriff's office was a squat building at the end of the main street, its door painted a fading red. Cole tied off the horses and came around to help Lydia down, his hand steady on her waist. She wanted to cling to him, to beg him to turn the wagon around and take her back to the ranch where she could pretend none of this was happening. But she'd spent years being a coward, years running and hiding. Cole was right. It was time to stand and fight. The door opened before they reached it, and a man stepped out who could only be Sheriff Dalton. He was middle-aged, weathered, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore his badge like it meant something, and his expression was carefully neutral as he looked between them. "Cole," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Mrs. Maddox, I was expecting you." "Sheriff?" Cole's hand moved to the small of Lydia's back, a subtle show of solidarity. "I assume Edmund Carver has already been here." "First thing this morning. Had quite a story to tell." Dalton's eyes fixed on Lydia, assessing. "Why don't you both come inside? We should talk." The office was spare and functional, a desk, 2 chairs, a gun cabinet, and a single cell in the back that thankfully stood empty. Dalton gestured for them to sit, then settled behind his desk with a sigh that spoke of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Carver claims you're his ward, Mrs. Maddox. Says you ran away from his care and stole a significant sum of money. He wants you returned to Philadelphia to face charges." Dalton pulled out a notebook, flipping it open. "He also says the marriage between you and Cole here isn't legitimate because you were already promised to another man. Says Cole knew you were a minor and married you anyway to avoid prosecution." Lydia's blood ran cold. "That's a lie. I'm 23 years old, and I was never—" "Easy," Cole murmured, his hand finding hers under the edge of the desk. "Let's take this one point at a time. Sheriff, do you have any documentation from Carver proving his claims?" "He showed me some letters, said they were from the man Lydia was supposed to marry, Calvin Thornton, a businessman from Philadelphia. The letters reference a marriage arrangement and a payment made to Carver." Dalton's expression was grave. "He also has a witness, a housekeeper who will testify that Lydia lived in his home as his ward and took money from his desk." Lydia felt the world tilting beneath her. Of course Edmund had thought of everything. Of course he'd brought witnesses and documentation. He was a lawyer by training, skilled at manipulating the truth into whatever shape served him best. "Sheriff, may I ask you something?" Cole's voice was calm, reasonable. "Did Carver provide any legal documents establishing guardianship? Any court orders? Any proof that Lydia was actually his ward and not simply a relative living in his house?" Dalton frowned. "No, but he said a lot of things, I'm sure, but saying something doesn't make it true." Cole leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "My wife is 23 years old. That's old enough to make her own decisions, guardianship or not. She chose to leave Philadelphia. She chose to answer my advertisement. She chose to marry me. None of that is illegal." "The theft, $47. Cole's tone made it clear what he thought of that amount. "Even if she did take it, and I'm not conceding that she did, it's not enough to warrant extradition. You know that, Sheriff. Carver's trying to use your office to strong-arm a grown woman into doing what he wants. I don't think that's the kind of law you're interested in enforcing." Dalton was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he looked at Lydia, and his expression softened slightly. "Why don't you tell me your side, Mrs. Maddox? In your own words." This was it, the moment of truth. Lydia took a deep breath, felt Cole's hand tighten around hers, and began to speak. My father died when I was 14. Edmund Carver was his brother, and he took me in. At first it seemed like kindness, but over time it became clear I was there to work, not to be family. I kept his house, did his cooking and cleaning, took in sewing to try to earn my own money. The words came easier than she'd expected, as if some dam inside her had finally broken. Edmund took every penny I earned. He said since I lived under his roof, my earnings belonged to him. When I was 22, he told me he'd arrange for me to marry Calvin Thornton, a man 40 years my senior. I didn't want the marriage, but Edmund said I had no choice, so I left. And the money? Dalton asked. I took $47 from his desk. It was less than half of what I'd earned from sewing over the years. I considered it wages owed. Lydia met the sheriff's eyes, refusing to look away. Maybe that makes me a thief in the eyes of the law, but I'd do it again. It was the only way I could afford to leave. Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying her. And this marriage arrangement with Thornton, you're saying it wasn't consensual? I'm saying I was never asked if I wanted it. I was told it was happening. Lydia's voice hardened. Edmund accepted money from Thornton. He called it a bride price, though he dressed it up in prettier words. He sold me, Sheriff. Maybe that's legal in some twisted interpretation of the law, but it's still wrong. The office fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Dalton looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he closed his notebook with a decisive snap. Here's what I think, he said slowly. I think Edmund Carver is angry that his property, because that's how he sees you, Mrs. Maddox, escaped his control. I think he's using the law as a weapon to try to get you back. And I think... He stood, moving to look out the window at the gray morning. I think a 23-year-old woman has every right to marry who she chooses and live where she pleases. Relief flooded through Lydia so powerfully she felt dizzy. Cole's hand squeezed hers again, and when she glanced at him, she saw the tension in his shoulders ease. However, Dalton continued, turning back to face them, Carver isn't going to let this go. He's already talking about bringing in a territorial judge, filing formal charges. He's got money and connections, and he's prepared to use both. You need to be ready for a fight. We are, Cole said firmly. Good, because it's going to get ugly. Dalton moved back to his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper. I'm going to write up a statement of what you've told me today, Mrs. Maddox. I want it on record that you came here voluntarily, that you're in this marriage of your own free will. It might not stop Carver, but it'll help if things go to court. As Dalton wrote, Lydia felt some of her fear beginning to transform into something else, anger. Edmund had spent years controlling her, and even now, hundreds of miles away, he was still trying to dictate her life. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. Sheriff, she said suddenly, what would it take to prove Edmund was abusive? To show that I had good reason to leave? Dalton looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Witnesses would help. Anyone who saw how he treated you. Documentation of injuries if there are any. But abuse is hard to prove, Mrs. Maddox, especially when it's a man's word against a woman's. I have scars, Lydia heard herself say. Cole's head whipped toward her, shock written on his face. She hadn't told him this part, hadn't shown him the evidence of what Edmund had done. On my back, from a belt. Edmund liked to punish what he called disobedience. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dalton's expression darkened, and Cole had gone completely still beside her. How recent? Dalton asked quietly. The last time was 3 weeks before I left. I'd refused to meet with Calvin Thornton, said I wouldn't marry him. Edmund locked me in my room for 2 days, and when he let me out, she stopped, unable to finish. But she didn't need to. They both understood. I'll need to document them, Dalton said, his voice gentle now. For the record, there's a doctor in town, Dr. Harrison. She could examine you, write up a medical report. She? Lydia repeated. Yes, came out here 5 years ago from Boston. Caused quite a stir. A woman doctor, but she's good at her job. Discreet, too. Dalton scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to Cole. Take your wife to see her. Get those scars documented. It might make all the difference. They left the sheriff's office in a state of stunned silence. Cole helped Lydia into the wagon without a word, his jaw tight and his eyes stormy. It wasn't until they were halfway to the doctor's office that he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was rough with emotion. "About the scars, about Edmund hitting you." "I don't know." Lydia stared at her hands, folded in her lap. "Shame, I suppose. Or fear that you'd see me differently, as damaged, broken." "Lydia, look at me." When she did, she found his gray eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "You're not broken. You survived something most people couldn't have. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you the strongest person I've ever met." Tears blurred her vision, and she blinked them back furiously. "I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feeling fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway." Cole reached over and gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You're doing that right now. Being here, telling your story, fighting back, that's courage, Lydia. Real courage." The tears spilled over then, and she didn't try to stop them. Cole pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that made her cry harder. She sobbed into his shirt, releasing years of pain and fear and loneliness, and he just held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. When the storm finally passed, Lydia pulled back, embarrassed by the wet spot she'd left on his shirt. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You needed that." Cole produced a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Feel better?" Surprisingly, she did. Lighter, as if crying had released some weight she'd been carrying for too long. "Yes." "Good. Because we still need to see the doctor, and then I imagine we'll need to face down whatever trouble Edmund's stirring up next." Cole guided the wagon back into motion. "But we'll do it together. You're not alone anymore, Lydia. I need you to believe that." "I'm trying," she whispered. Dr. Emily Harrison's office was above the general store, accessed by an external staircase. The doctor herself answered their knock. A woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She listened to their explanation without interruption, then nodded briskly. "Come in, Mrs. Maddox. Mr. Maddox, you can wait in the outer room." Cole squeezed Lydia's hand once before releasing it. "I'll be right here." The examination room was clean and professional, smelling of carbolic and something herbal Lydia couldn't identify. "Doctor," Harrison gestured to a screen in the corner. "You can undress behind there. I'll need to see your back." Lydia's hands shook as she unbuttoned her dress. She'd avoided looking at the scars for weeks, avoided thinking about them. But now, as she stood in her chemise while Dr. Harrison examined her back, she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical nakedness. "Jesus," Dr. Harrison breathed. Lydia heard the scratch of a pen, the doctor making notes. "These are extensive. Multiple incidents?" "Yes." Lydia's voice came out small. "Over the course of about 2 years. Some of these have healed poorly. You should have seen a doctor." There was no judgment in the statement, just clinical observation. "I couldn't. Edmund wouldn't allow it." Dr. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You can get dressed now. I have what I need." When Lydia emerged from behind the screen, Dr. Harrison was writing in a leather-bound journal. She looked up, her expression a mix of professional detachment and genuine sympathy. "I'll prepare a full medical report for Sheriff Dalton. In my professional opinion, these scars are consistent with repeated abuse using a leather strap or belt. They're enough to establish a pattern of violent behavior." "Will it help?" Lydia asked. "With Edmund?" "It should. A man who beats his ward isn't likely to be seen as a credible guardian, no matter how much money he has." Dr. Harrison closed her journal and stood. "But, Mrs. Maddox, I need to ask, are you safe now? With Mr. Maddox?" "Yes," Lydia said without hesitation. "Cole would never. He's not like that." "Good, because if that ever changes, my door is always open." Dr. Harrison walked her to the outer room where Cole waited. "Your wife is remarkably resilient, Mr. Maddox. Take care of her." "I intend to," Cole said quietly. They were halfway back to the wagon when a voice stopped them cold. "Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple." Edmund stood in the shadow of the general store awning, flanked by two men Lydia didn't recognize. One wore a suit that screamed lawyer, the other had the hard-eyed look of a hired gun. Edmund's smile was cold and triumphant. "I told you this wasn't over, Lydia. Did you really think you could come here, spin your lies to some backwater sheriff, and I'd just give up?" He took a step forward, and Lydia felt Cole move slightly in front of her. "You're coming back to Philadelphia with me. Today. And your so-called husband can't stop it." "Actually, I can." Cole's voice was ice. "Sheriff Dalton has already taken Mrs. Maddox's statement. She's staying here of her own free will. You have no legal claim to her." "I have every legal claim." Edmund pulled papers from his jacket, waving them like weapons. "These are guardianship documents, properly filed with the Philadelphia courts. They establish that Lydia is my legal ward until she reaches the age of 25 or marries with my consent. Your marriage is invalid because it was contracted without my permission." Lydia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's not possible. Those documents don't exist. My father never—" "Your father signed them on his deathbed, knowing you'd need someone to look after you." Edmund's smile widened. "They're perfectly legal and properly notarized. Any judge will uphold them." "They're forgeries," Lydia spat. "My father was barely conscious when he died. He couldn't have signed anything." "Can you prove that?" The lawyer stepped forward, his voice oily. "Because I have witnesses who will testify otherwise. The doctor who attended your father, the priest who gave him last rites. They'll all swear he was of sound mind when he signed those papers. It was a trap, perfectly constructed, and Lydia had walked right into it. Edmund had spent months planning this, lining up witnesses, creating documentation, building an unassailable case, and she had nothing but her word and the scars on her back. "This is harassment," Cole said, his hand moving to his pistol. "And if you don't get off the street right now, Sheriff Dalton's going to hear about it." The hired gun shifted, his own hand moving to his weapon. For a terrible moment, Lydia thought they were about to witness a shootout in the middle of the street, but then another voice cut through the tension. "There a problem here?" Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew he held the power. Behind him came 3 deputies, all armed, all looking ready for trouble. Edmund's expression soured, but he recovered quickly. "No problem, Sheriff. Just trying to have a conversation with my ward, but it seems Mr. Maddox is being unreasonable." "Funny thing about that," Dalton said conversationally. "Mrs. Maddox just came from Dr. Harrison's office. The doctor found some interesting evidence of abuse, the kind of evidence that makes me wonder about the character of a man claiming to be a guardian." Edmund's face flushed red. "Those are lies. Lydia always was prone to self-harm, creating injuries to gain sympathy. I have medical records documenting her instability." "More convenient documentation," Cole said flatly. "How much did you pay for those, Carver?" "How dare you, Tsets?" "Enough!" Dalton's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Carver, I don't know what games you're playing, but they end now. Mrs. Maddox has made her statement. She's staying in Montana of her own free will, and unless you have a court order from a territorial judge, not some papers from Philadelphia, you have no authority here." "We'll see about that." Edmund's voice dripped venom. "I'll be back with that court order, Sheriff, and when I am, you'll be arresting Mr. Maddox for kidnapping and statutory rape of a minor." "She's 23, Cole growled. "So she claims, but I have a birth certificate that says otherwise." Edmund turned his cold eyes on Lydia. "You can't run from the truth, my dear. It always catches up." He strode away, his lawyer and hired gun following like loyal dogs. Lydia watched them go, feeling something inside her crack and shift. Edmund had planned for everything, every possible defense, every argument. He'd built a cage of lies and documentation, and she was trapped inside it. "Don't listen to him," Cole said urgently, turning her to face him. "He's bluffing. Those documents can't all be legitimate." "Can't they?" Lydia's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Edmund's a lawyer, Cole. He knows how to work the system. He's had months to prepare this, and I have nothing, just my word and some scars that he's already explained away." "You have me," Cole said fiercely, "and you have the truth. That has to count for something." But Lydia wasn't so sure anymore. She'd seen how the world worked, how money and power could bend truth into any shape required. Edmund had both in abundance, and he was prepared to use them to drag her back to Philadelphia in chains if necessary. The ride back to the ranch was silent and grim. Storm clouds had rolled in while they were in town, and the first drops of rain began to fall as they reached the house. Cole helped Lydia down from the wagon, his touch gentle, but his expression troubled. "We should talk," he said. "Figure out our next move." But before they could step inside, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard. As he drew closer, Lydia recognized one of the men from town, young Tommy Preston, who worked part-time at the general store. "Mr. Maddox," Tommy shouted, reining his horse to a sliding stop. "Sheriff sent me. There's going to be a hearing, day after tomorrow. Edmund Carver got a judge to agree to it. You and Mrs. Maddox got to appear, or there will be a warrant issued." Cole's jaw clenched. "So, what kind of hearing?" "Something about guardianship and the validity of your marriage. The judge is coming from the territorial capital." Tommy looked apologetic. "Sheriff said to tell you it's serious, real serious." After Tommy rode off, Cole and Lydia stood in the rain, getting soaked but neither moving to go inside. Finally, Cole spoke. "We need a lawyer. Someone who knows territorial law, who can fight Edmund on his own ground. Where are we going to find someone like that out here? And even if we could, how would we pay for it?" Lydia felt despair creeping in like the cold rain. "Edmund has unlimited resources. We have nothing. We have each other, and we have the truth." Cole took her hands, his grip firm and warm despite the rain. "I know a man. Used to be a judge in Colorado before he retired out here. Lives about 2 hours north. If anyone can help us, it's him. 2 hours north and 2 hours back. That's half a day of travel, and the hearing is day after tomorrow. Then we leave at first light." Cole's expression was determined, almost fierce. "I'm not letting Edmund win, Lydia. I'm not letting him take you. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, we fight." Lydia looked up at him, this man she'd known for only days, but who'd already become her anchor in the storm. Rain streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead, but his gray eyes were steady and sure. He believed they could win. He believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, she could start believing in herself. "Whatever it takes," she echoed, and felt something inside her shift and harden into resolve. Edmund had spent years breaking her down, making her believe she was worthless and weak, but he'd been wrong. She'd survived him. She'd escaped, and she sure as hell wasn't going back without a fight. They went inside, both dripping water on the clean floors, but neither caring. Cole built up the fire while Lydia changed into dry clothes. When she emerged, he'd made coffee and was sitting at the table with a map spread out before him, tracing routes with his finger. "We'll take the wagon," he said without looking up. "Ride hard, but not so hard we break the horses. Should make it to Judge Blackwood's place by mid-morning if we leave before dawn. And if he can't help us, then we'll figure something else out." Cole finally looked up, and the intensity in his gaze made Lydia's breath catch. "I told you, you're not alone anymore. I meant it. We face this together, win or lose." Lydia moved to sit across from him, her hands wrapped around her own coffee cup for warmth. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could walk away. Claim the marriage was made under false pretenses. Get an annulment. You'd be free of all this trouble." "Is that what you want?" Cole asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. Was it? Part of her still believed she was poison, that anyone who got close to her would be destroyed by Edmund's vindictiveness. But another part, the part that was growing stronger with each passing hour, knew that walking away from Cole would be the biggest mistake of her life. "No," she said finally, "but I don't want you to stay out of obligation or pity." "Good, because that's not why I'm staying." Cole reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm staying because when I made those vows, I meant them. I'm staying because you're the bravest person I've ever met. And I'm staying because—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "Because in 3 days you've made this house feel like a home again, in a way it hasn't since Sarah died. And I'll be damned if I let some bully from Philadelphia take that away." The words settled around Lydia's heart like a warm blanket. She squeezed Cole's hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat there in the firelight, hands joined, while the storm raged outside and the uncertain future loomed ahead. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and that would have to be enough. Document. Part 4. They left before the sun touched the horizon, the wagon wheels cutting through mud left by the previous night's storm. Lydia huddled in her shawl against the pre-dawn chill, watching the landscape emerge from darkness in shades of gray and purple. Cole drove with focused intensity, his hands steady on the reins, his jaw set in a way that told her he was already planning their strategy for the hearing tomorrow. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with fear and uncertainty. Something had shifted the night before when they'd sat holding hands across the table. An unspoken understanding had passed between them. They were in this together, truly together, and neither would abandon the other no matter how dark things became. "Tell me about Judge Blackwood," Lydia said as the sun finally broke over the mountains, painting everything gold. Cole was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Met him 5 years back when I was buying this land. There was a dispute over the boundaries, and the previous owner tried to cheat me out of 50 acres. Judge Blackwood presided over the case, saw right through the lies, ruled in my favor. He's sharp as they come and doesn't tolerate people who abuse the law for personal gain. You think he'll help us?" "I think he'll listen. Whether he can help depends on what kind of case Edmonds actually built." Cole glanced at her, his expression softening. "But if anyone can find the holes in those forged documents, it's Blackwood. Man spent 30 years on the bench. He knows every trick lawyers use." They drove on through country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful. Pine forests replaced open prairie, and the air carried the scent of resin and earth. Lydia found herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the peace of the wilderness. Out here, Edmund's threats seemed distant, almost unreal. It was just her and Cole, and the endless sky. "I used to dream about places like this," she said suddenly. "When I was locked in my room, I'd imagine running away to somewhere wild and free, somewhere Edmund could never find me." She laughed bitterly. "Guess even my imagination wasn't big enough. He found me anyway." "He found you," Cole agreed. "But he hasn't won, and he's not going to." The certainty in his voice made Lydia want to believe. She was learning that Cole Maddox didn't make promises he couldn't keep. If he said they'd fight, they'd fight. If he said Edmund wouldn't win, then maybe, just maybe, he was right. Judge Blackwood's house appeared as they crested a hill around mid-morning. It was a sturdy log structure built beside a creek, with smoke rising from the chimney and a well-tended garden visible even from a distance. An older man stood on the porch as they approached, as if he'd been expecting them. "Cole Maddox," the judge called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Heard you got yourself married. Figured I'd be seeing you before long." Cole brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down, helping Lydia after him. "News travels fast. Always does when Edmund Carver's involved." Judge Blackwood descended the porch steps, revealing himself to be a tall man in his 70s, still straight-backed and sharp-eyed. His gaze moved to Lydia, assessing but not unkind. "You must be the bride, the one causing all the commotion." "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door, sir," Lydia said quietly. "Don't apologize for being hunted by a predator. That's not your fault." Blackwood gestured toward the house. "Come inside. We've got a lot to discuss, and not much time to do it." The interior of the house was lined with bookshelves, every surface covered with legal volumes and papers. Blackwood moved through the organized chaos with practiced ease, clearing space at a large oak table and gesturing for them to sit. He poured coffee from a pot that had clearly been ready for their arrival, then settled across from them with the air of a man preparing for battle. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Don't leave anything out. I need to know exactly what we're up against." So Lydia told her story again, but this time she included everything: the years of abuse, the locks on her door, Edmund's increasingly inappropriate attention, the marriage arrangement with Calvin Thornton, her desperate escape. Cole filled in details about Edmund's arrival at the ranch, the confrontation in town, the forged guardianship documents. Blackwood listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Edmund Carver is clever. I'll give him that. He's built a case that looks solid on the surface. Guardianship documents, witness testimonies, medical records claiming instability. On paper, he has every legal right to demand your return." Lydia's heart sank. "So we can't fight it. I didn't say that. Blackwood's eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. I said it looks solid, but I've seen enough forgeries in my time to know what to look for. Those guardianship documents. Did your father have a lawyer? Yes, Mr. Patterson handled his affairs. And is Patterson still practicing in Philadelphia? Lydia thought back. I don't know. He was quite old even when my father died. He might have retired, or... She stopped, realization dawning. Or Edmund might have made sure he can't testify. Exactly. The Blackwood made another note. Men like Carver don't leave loose ends. If Patterson is the type to tell the truth, he's either been paid off or silenced. But that works in our favor. We can subpoena him, force him to testify. If he refuses or can't be found, that casts doubt on the document's legitimacy. What about the witnesses? Cole asked. The doctor and priest who supposedly saw Lydia's father sign the papers? Same principle. We demand they appear in person. Most people won't travel across the country to commit perjury in open court. They'll either refuse to come, which hurts Carver's case, or they'll come, and we'll break them on the stand. Blackwood leaned forward, his expression intense. But here's what really matters. Lydia, you said Edmund claimed you're not 23, that he has a birth certificate proving you're younger. Yes, but I know my own age. Of course you do. But he's trying to muddy the waters, make it seem like your marriage to Cole was contracted while you were a minor under his guardianship. That would make it invalid and potentially criminal. Blackwood tapped his pen against the table. Do you have any documentation of your real age, a Bible with family records, a baptismal certificate? Lydia's mind raced. My mother kept a family Bible. It had all our birth dates recorded in it, but Edmund has it now. He took it after my father died, said he was preserving family records. Convenient, and I'm guessing the birth date recorded in that Bible doesn't match the one on his forged certificate. Blackwood stood, moving to one of his bookshelves and pulling down a thick volume. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to challenge every single document Carver produces. Demand originals, not copies. Demand chain of custody. Make him prove authenticity at every turn. Second, we're going to put you on the stand, Lydia. Let the judge see the scars, hear your story in your own words. Character evidence matters, especially when it contradicts the narrative Carver's trying to spin. What if the judge believes Edmund instead of me? The fear that had been her constant companion crept back in. He's got money, witnesses, documentation. I have nothing but my word. You have more than that. Blackwood fixed her with a look that seemed to see straight through to her soul. You have truth on your side, and you have something Carver doesn't expect. You have courage. You ran halfway across the country to escape him. You married a stranger rather than submit to his control. You came back to face him in court instead of running again. That's not the behavior of a liar or a thief. That's the behavior of someone fighting for her life. The words hit Lydia like a physical force. She'd spent so long seeing herself through Edmund's eyes, worthless, weak, broken. But Blackwood was holding up a different mirror, showing her a reflection she barely recognized. A woman who'd survived. A woman who'd fought back. A woman who deserved to win. So we fight, she said, her voice stronger than it had been. We fight, Blackwood agreed. And we fight dirty if we have to. Carver wants to use the law as a weapon? Fine. We'll show him what that looks like when it's turned against him. Abuse of a ward is a serious crime. Arranging a marriage for profit is human trafficking. If we play this right, he won't just lose, he'll face charges himself. Cole had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he spoke. What are our chances? Realistically? Blackwood considered. 50-50, maybe better. Depends on the judge they've brought in. If it's someone Carver has in his pocket, we're in trouble. But most territorial judges don't appreciate being manipulated by out-of-state lawyers. They take their independence seriously. He began pulling books from the shelves, stacking them on the table. I'll ride back with you. Can't practice law anymore. I'm retired, but I can sit second chair, advise, help prepare. We've got until tomorrow morning to build an ironclad defense. They spent the next 2 hours going over strategy, with Blackwood drilling Lydia on her testimony, pointing out where Edmund's lawyer would try to trip her up, teaching her how to answer questions without giving away more than necessary. It was exhausting and terrifying, but also empowering. For the first time, Lydia felt like she had weapons to fight back with instead of just running and hiding. When they finally set out for the return journey, the sun was past its zenith and starting its descent toward the mountains. Blackwood rode his own horse alongside the wagon, still talking through legal strategies and precedents. Cole listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his tactical mind clearly working through scenarios and possibilities. "One more thing," Blackwood said as they approached the final stretch toward the ranch. "Carver will try to separate you two. He'll argue that Cole is unduly influencing you, that you can't think clearly because you're under his control. You need to be prepared for that. They might even demand you be held in custody until the hearing, claim you're a flight risk." Lydia's blood ran cold. They can do that? They can try. Whether they'll succeed depends on Sheriff Dalton. My guess is he won't allow it, but Carver might have gotten to him. Blackwood's expression was grim. "If it comes to that, don't fight them. Go peacefully. It'll look better to the judge, and it's only one night. Cole can't help you if he's in jail for interfering with the law." "I don't like it," Cole said flatly. "Neither do I. But sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war." Blackwood glanced between them. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. You both need to be ready for that." They reached the ranch as twilight was falling, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Lydia had never been so glad to see the simple log house, the barn, the familiar landscape that had become home in just a few short days. But her relief was short-lived. A horse was tied to the porch railing, Sheriff Dalton's horse. And standing on the porch with the sheriff was Edmund, his expression triumphant. "Well, well," Edmund said as they approached. "Running off to find yourself a lawyer, were you? How predictable." Cole brought the wagon to a stop, his hand moving instinctively toward his pistol. But Blackwood placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Easy. Let's hear what they have to say." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, and Lydia could see the conflict written on his weathered face. "Cole, Mrs. Maddox, I'm afraid I've got a court order here." "Mrs. Maddox is to be remanded to my custody until the hearing tomorrow. Judge's orders." "On what grounds?" Blackwood demanded, dismounting smoothly. "Flight risk. Mr. Carver's lawyer convinced the judge that Mrs. Maddox might run before the hearing." Dalton looked genuinely apologetic. "I don't like it any more than you do, but I have to follow the law." "That's absurd," Cole snapped. "We went to see a lawyer, not run away. We came back, didn't we?" Nevertheless, Edmund stepped forward, barely containing his glee. "Lydia will be spending tonight in the town jail, where she belongs, just like the common criminal she is." Rage flooded through Lydia, hot and fierce. But before she could speak, Blackwood's voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff, may I see that court order?" Dalton handed over the papers. Blackwood read them carefully, his expression thoughtful. Then he looked up. "This order specifies custody, but it doesn't specify where that custody must take place. Technically, Mrs. Maddox could remain here under house arrest as long as someone from your office stays to ensure she doesn't leave." "That's not," Edmund started, but Dalton cut him off. "Actually, Judge Blackwood's right. The order just says custody, doesn't specify a jail cell." The sheriff looked at Cole. "You have a spare room? Somewhere Deputy Harris could keep watch?" "Yes," Cole said quickly. "Absolutely." Edmund's face turned purple with rage. "This is ridiculous. She's a criminal. She belongs in a cell." "She's accused, not convicted," Blackwood said mildly. "And the law is quite clear on this point. Sheriff Dalton is within his rights to interpret the custody order as he sees fit." For a moment, Lydia thought Edmund might actually attack someone. His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming fast and hard. But then his lawyer, who'd been standing quietly in the shadows, stepped forward and whispered something in his ear. Edmund's expression shifted, cold calculation replacing rage. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Let her stay here tonight, but tomorrow, when the judge rules in my favor, she'll be in chains. Mark my words." He turned that cold gaze on Lydia. "I always win, my dear. Always. You should have learned that by now." He stalked off toward his horse, his lawyer following. They rode away into the gathering darkness. leaving a silence that felt heavy with unspoken threats. "I'll send Deputy Harris over within the hour," Dalton said quietly. "Cole, I trust you'll make this easy for him?" "He'll have no trouble from us," Cole assured him. After Dalton left, the three of them stood in the twilight, exhaustion and tension radiating from each of them. Finally, Blackwood spoke. "That was the opening salvo. Tomorrow will be the real battle." He looked at Lydia, his expression serious. "Get some rest tonight if you can. You'll need all your strength for what's coming." Deputy Harris arrived an hour later, a young man who looked distinctly uncomfortable with his assignment. Cole set him up in the spare room with coffee and food, treating him more like a guest than a guard. Then Cole and Lydia retreated to the main room where a fire crackled in the hearth and Blackwood sat reviewing his notes. "I should be scared," Lydia said quietly, staring into the flames. "Tomorrow could end with me being dragged back to Philadelphia, but all I feel is angry." "Good," Cole said. "Anger's better than fear. Anger gives you strength." "Your husband's right," Blackwood added, not looking up from his papers. "Edmund Carver expects you to be terrified, to break down on the stand. The angrier you are, the stronger you'll present. Use that." Lydia looked at these two men who barely knew her but were willing to fight for her. One who'd married her sight unseen, the other who'd come out of retirement to help. And she felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and permanent. She was done running, done hiding, done letting Edmund Carver dictate her life. "I want to testify," she said suddenly. "I want to tell them everything, every horrible thing Edmund did, every bruise, every lock on my door, every degrading comment. I want it all on record." Blackwood finally looked up, and something like approval flickered in his eyes. "It'll be painful. They'll try to discredit you, make you seem hysterical or unstable." "Let them try." Lydia's voice was steel. "I've survived Edmund for years. I can survive his lawyers for one day." "That's the spirit," Blackwood said, and turned to Cole. "Your wife is going to do just fine tomorrow." The hours stretched on as they prepared, with Blackwood continuing to coach Lydia through potential questions while Cole made notes and occasionally interjected with observations. By the time midnight approached, Lydia's head was swimming with legal terms and strategies, but she felt as ready as she'd ever be. "Get some sleep," Blackwood finally ordered, gathering his papers. "Both of you. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Cole walked Lydia to the bedroom door, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. The air between them felt charged with everything unsaid, fear, hope, and something else Lydia was afraid to name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for believing me, for fighting for me, for—" Cole silenced her by taking her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You don't need to thank me. We're in this together, remember? Whatever happens tomorrow, that doesn't change. What if we lose? Then we appeal. We fight harder. We find another way." His gray eyes were fierce in the firelight. "I told you, Lydia, you're not alone anymore. I'm not letting Edmund take you. Not tomorrow, not ever." The certainty in his voice made something in Lydia's chest crack open. Before she could think better of it, she rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his scarred cheek. Cole went very still, his breath catching. "For luck," she whispered, then slipped into the bedroom before she could see his reaction. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the murmur of voices from the main room as Cole and Blackwood continued strategizing. Tomorrow, she would face Edmund in court. Tomorrow, her entire future would be decided. Tomorrow, she would either win her freedom or lose everything. But tonight, for these few hours before dawn, she let herself imagine a different future. One where she and Cole truly became husband and wife in more than just name. One where the ranch became a real home filled with laughter and life instead of fear and survival. One where she could wake up each morning without wondering if today would be the day Edmund finally destroyed her. It was a beautiful dream, and tomorrow she'd fight to make it real. Sleep came fitfully, broken by nightmares of courtrooms and chains, of Edmund's cold smile and the sound of cell doors clanging shut. Each time she woke, Lydia forced herself to breathe, to remember where she was, to recall that she wasn't alone. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, she gave up on sleep entirely and rose to dress. Her hands shook as she buttoned her dress, The same one she'd worn when she'd first arrived in Montana, now carefully cleaned and pressed. She braided her hair with meticulous care, pinning it up in a style that made her look older, more mature, more credible. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The frightened girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach was gone. In her place stood a woman preparing for war. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her to the main room, where she found Cole already up and cooking breakfast. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, dark circles under his eyes and tension in every line of his body. But when he saw her, he smiled. "You look ready," he said simply. "I am." And for the first time, Lydia realized it was true. Whatever happened today, she was ready to face it head on. Blackwood emerged from the spare room where he'd spent the night, looking surprisingly refreshed for a man his age. "Good, you're up. Let's go over your testimony one more time while we eat." They sat around the table, food growing cold on their plates as Blackwood drilled Lydia through question after question. Cole listened intently, occasionally suggesting different phrasings or pointing out where she might be vulnerable to attack. Deputy Harris joined them, awkwardly eating his breakfast while pretending not to hear their legal preparations. Finally, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Blackwood sat back. "That's all we can do. The rest is up to the judge and whatever higher power you believe in." They rode into town in a solemn procession, Cole driving the wagon with Lydia beside him, Blackwood and Deputy Harris following on horseback. The streets of Bitterroot Valley were more crowded than Lydia had ever seen them, people gathering to witness what promised to be the most dramatic court proceeding the town had seen in years. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, speculating, wondering if she was truly a victim or just a clever liar. The hearing was being held in the town hall, a building that usually hosted social gatherings and community meetings. Someone had hastily converted it into a makeshift courtroom, with a table and chair set up at the front for the judge, additional tables for the lawyers, and rows of benches for spectators. It was already packed when they arrived, every seat taken and people standing along the walls. Edmund sat at the front with his lawyer, both men dressed in expensive suits that made everyone else look like rough frontier folk by comparison. When Edmund saw Lydia enter, his lips curved into a smile that made her skin crawl. He thought he'd already won. He always thought he'd win. But this time, Lydia thought as she took her seat beside Cole and Blackwood, this time might be different. This time, she was fighting back. And this time, she had people on her side who believed in her. The bailiff called for order and a man emerged from a back room. The judge, dressed in black robes that seemed too formal for the rough frontier setting. He was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. As he took his seat, Lydia found herself praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please, she thought, please let justice win today. Please let truth matter more than money and lies. The judge's gavel cracked against the table, and the sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded space. "In the matter of Edmund Carver versus Lydia Maddox, guardianship and marriage validity. Let's begin." And with those words, Lydia's fate hung in the balance, waiting to see if courage and truth would be enough to defeat power and deception. Edmund's lawyer rose first, a man named Thornhill, who moved with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to winning. His voice was smooth as silk as he addressed the judge, laying out Edmund's case with practiced precision. Lydia was a troubled young woman, he claimed, barely 20 years old, who'd been under Edmund's guardianship since her father's death. She'd stolen money, run away, and contracted an illegal marriage with a stranger to avoid facing the consequences of her actions. "We have documentation," Thornhill said, placing papers before the judge with a flourish. "Guardianship papers signed by Miss Carver's father on his deathbed, properly notarized and filed with the Philadelphia courts. Medical records showing a history of instability and self-harm. Witness testimonies from respectable citizens who will attest to Mr. Carver's exemplary care of his ward." The judge examined the papers, his expression unreadable. Lydia's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone in the room must hear it. Beside her, Cole's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, looking up, "I understand you're representing Mrs. Maddox." "Advising, Your Honor. I'm retired from practice, but I'm here to ensure Mrs. Maddox receives fair representation." Blackwood stood, his age falling away as he assumed the authority of his former position. And I'd like to start by questioning the authenticity of those documents. On what grounds? On the grounds that they're convenient forgeries created to give Mr. Carver legal cover for what amounts to human trafficking. Blackwood's voice rang through the room. I request that the court demand original documents, not copies, and that we be allowed to verify their authenticity with the supposed notary and witnesses. Thornhill's smooth expression flickered. That's absurd. These are certified copies, which means nothing if the originals are fraudulent. Blackwood turned to face Edmund directly. Mr. Carver claims he had these documents for years. Surely he brought the originals with him on such an important journey. Edmund's face had gone red. The originals are safely stored in Philadelphia. How convenient. Blackwood's tone made it clear what he thought of that explanation. Your Honor, I move that we table discussion of guardianship until original documents can be produced and verified. In the meantime, let's address the more pressing issue, the validity of the marriage between Cole and Lydia Maddox. The judge considered this, then nodded. Motion granted. Mr. Thornhill, you'll need to produce original documents or verified testimonies from the notary and witnesses. Until then, the guardianship claim is in question. He turned to Blackwood. Proceed with the marriage validity issue. Cole was called to testify first. He stood, tall and steady, and swore his oath with a hand on the Bible. Blackwood questioned him gently, establishing the timeline, the advertisement, Lydia's response, their meeting, and immediate marriage with Reverend Mitchell. Did you know at the time that Mr. Carver claimed guardianship over Lydia? Blackwood asked. No, sir. Mrs. Maddox told me she had no family, that she was of age and free to marry. And did you have any reason to doubt her? None whatsoever. Cole's gray eyes found Lydia's across the room. She was honest with me from the start about wanting a fresh beginning. That's all I needed to know. Thornhill took over for cross-examination, his tone sharp and aggressive. Mr. Maddox, isn't it true you were desperate for a wife? That you'd advertise for one suggests a man who can't find a woman through normal means. Objection, Blackwood said mildly. Relevance? I'm establishing motive. Mr. Maddox was so desperate he didn't ask questions, didn't verify Miss Carver's story, didn't care whether she was legally free to marry. I asked the questions that mattered, Cole said evenly. Was she willing? Was she of age? Was she free to make her own choices? She answered yes to all three, and Reverend Mitchell verified her age and married us legally. But you didn't investigate whether she had a guardian. Why would I? She's 23 years old. Adults don't need guardians. Thornhill smiled like a cat with cream. Ah, but that's the question, isn't it? Is she 23? Or is she younger, as Mr. Carver's documentation suggests? Cole's jaw tightened. I believe my wife when she tells me her age. Belief isn't evidence, Mr. Maddox. The questioning continued, Thornhill trying to paint Cole as either a fool or a conspirator, but Cole refused to be rattled. He answered each question with calm certainty, never wavering in his defense of Lydia or their marriage. By the time he stepped down, Lydia felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Then it was her turn. Lydia stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness chair. The room seemed to press in on her from all sides. Edmund's cold stare, the curious faces of the townspeople, the judge's penetrating gaze. She swore her oath, her voice barely above a whisper, and sat. Blackwood approached her with a gentle smile. Mrs. Maddox, how old are you? 23. I was born on March 15th, 1852. And where were you born? Philadelphia. My mother was Anne Carver. My father was Thomas Carver. The familiar facts steadied her, gave her something solid to hold on to. Tell the court about your life after your parents died. Lydia took a breath and began. She spoke of her father's death when she was 14, of Edmund taking her in, of the gradual transformation from reluctant guardian to something darker. She described the locks on her door, the confiscation of her earnings, the isolation from anyone who might help her. And then Mr. Carver arranged a marriage for you? Blackwood prompted. Yes, to Calvin Thornton, a man of 60 who'd been married 3 times before. Each wife had died under... She stopped, choosing her words carefully. under circumstances that raised questions. Did you want this marriage? No. The word came out fierce and strong. I refused. That's when Edmund locked me in my room for 2 days, and when he finally let me out, her voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. He beat me with his belt. To teach me obedience, he said. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. You're claiming Mr. Carver physically abused you? I'm not claiming it, Your Honor. I'm stating it as fact. Dr. Emily Harrison examined me and documented extensive scarring on my back, consistent with repeated beatings over a 2-year period. Thornhill shot to his feet. Objection! This is pure fabrication. Miss Carver has a documented history of self-harm. If I may, Your Honor, Dr. Harrison's voice rang out from the back of the room. She stood, moving forward with calm authority. I examined Mrs. Maddox 2 days ago. The scars on her back are absolutely not self-inflicted. They're consistent with being struck repeatedly with a leather strap or belt. I'd stake my medical license on that assessment. The judge looked at Thornhill. You mentioned medical records suggesting self-harm. Do you have those with you? Thornhill's smooth expression cracked. They're with the other documents in Philadelphia. Of course they are. The judge's tone had gone frosty. Dr. Harrison, I'd like to see your report. Mrs. Maddox, please continue. Lydia's confidence grew with each word. She described her escape, the money she'd taken, her journey across the country. She spoke of answering Cole's advertisement, of making the choice to marry him, of finding in Montana something she'd never had in Philadelphia, freedom. So you're saying this marriage was your choice? Blackwood asked. Absolutely. Cole gave me something Edmund never did. The right to choose my own life. Thank you, Mrs. Maddox. No further questions. Thornhill approached for cross-examination like a wolf circling prey. Miss Carver. Mrs. Maddox, Lydia corrected firmly. His lips thinned. You claim you were beaten, but you never reported this abuse to the authorities. Why not? Because Edmund is a lawyer with powerful friends. Because I was alone and frightened. Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. She met his eyes without flinching. Was I wrong? You claim you're 23, but Mr. Carver has a birth certificate that says otherwise. Then his birth certificate is as forged as his guardianship documents. You stole money from your guardian. I took wages I'd earned from a man who had no legal right to keep them. You married Mr. Maddox under false pretenses. I married him honestly, as a free woman of legal age. The only person operating under false pretenses here is Edmund Carver. Thornhill's face reddened. He fired question after question, trying to trip her up to make her seem hysterical or unreliable. But Lydia had spent years walking on eggshells around Edmund, learning to control her emotions, to think before speaking. Those survival skills served her now. She answered each question with calm precision, never losing her composure, never giving Thornhill the emotional outburst he was clearly hoping for. Finally, Thornhill threw up his hands. No further questions. As Lydia returned to her seat, Cole reached for her hand again, pride written clearly on his face. Blackwood leaned in and whispered, You did beautifully. But the battle wasn't over. Edmund himself took the stand, presenting himself as a concerned guardian whose ungrateful ward had repaid his kindness with theft and defamation. He denied every accusation, claimed the scars were old injuries from before Lydia came to live with him, insisted he'd only ever wanted what was best for her. I tried to arrange a suitable marriage, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Mr. Thornton is a respectable businessman who would have provided well for her, but Lydia always was headstrong and foolish. She ran away rather than accept the good life I'd arranged for her. Good life? Blackwood's voice cut through Edmund's performance when it was his turn to cross-examine. Is that what you call locking a young woman in her room for days at a time? Is that what you call taking every penny she earned? She lived under my roof. Is that what you call selling her to a 60-year-old man for profit? Blackwood's voice rose, filling the courtroom with righteous anger. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? You took money from Calvin Thornton. That makes you not a guardian, Mr. Carver, but a procurer, a seller of human flesh. Edmund's composure finally cracked. How dare you? I am a respected lawyer, a pillar of my community. You're a man who beats women and calls it discipline, a man who forges documents and calls it law, a man who trades in human misery and calls it guardianship. Blackwood turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move that charges be brought against Edmund Carver for abuse of a dependent, human trafficking, and fraud. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked again and again, calling for order. Edmund was on his feet, shouting denials. Thornhill was trying to object. And through it all, Lydia sat perfectly still, watching her nightmare finally come undone. When order was finally restored, the judge looked exhausted. I've heard enough. I'm going to retire to consider my ruling. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. The wait was agony. Cole, Lydia, and Blackwood sat in the back of the room while spectators milled about, speculating in hushed voices. Edmund and Thornhill stood apart, conferring intensely. Lydia watched them, trying to read their expressions, trying to guess what they were planning. He knows he's losing, Blackwood said quietly. Look at his body language. He's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous, Cole observed, his hand never leaving Lydia's. Finally, the bailiff called them back to order. The judge returned, his expression grave. The room fell silent as he settled into his chair and looked out over the assembled crowd. I've presided over a lot of cases in my career, he began, but I have to say this is one of the more disturbing ones. We have allegations of abuse, forgery, and trafficking on one side, claims of theft and deception on the other. And in the middle, we have a young woman whose entire future hangs in the balance. Lydia's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Cole's hand tightened around hers. Having reviewed the evidence, such as it is, and having heard the testimonies, I find myself drawn to several inescapable conclusions. The judge looked directly at Edmund. First, Mr. Carver, your documentation is highly suspect. The fact that you've produced only copies, that your witnesses are conveniently unavailable, that your evidence cannot be verified. These things do not inspire confidence. Until you can produce original documents and live witnesses, I'm dismissing your guardianship claim. Edmund surged to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Sit down, Mr. Carver, or I'll hold you in contempt. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. Edmund sat, his face purple with rage. Second, Dr. Harrison's medical report is damning. The scars on Mrs. Maddox's back tell a story that contradicts everything you've claimed about your care of her. Coupled with her testimony, which I found credible and consistent, I'm inclined to believe abuse occurred. Hope began to bloom in Lydia's chest, fragile but growing stronger with each word. Third, even if your guardianship claim were legitimate, which I do not believe it is, Mrs. Maddox is clearly of legal age to make her own decisions. She's 23 years old by her own testimony, and I see no credible evidence to contradict that. Therefore, her marriage to Cole Maddox was contracted legally and with full consent of both parties. The judge paused, letting his words sink in. The marriage between Cole and Lydia Maddox is valid and will remain so. Mrs. Maddox is free to remain in Montana with her husband, and Mr. Carver, his expression hardened. I'm referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor. The allegations against you are serious enough to warrant a full investigation. I suggest you remain in Montana pending that investigation, as leaving the territory could be construed as fleeing prosecution. The courtroom erupted again, but this time with a different energy. Lydia heard herself sob, not with fear but with relief so profound it felt like being reborn. Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she shook with the force of her emotions. Around them, people were talking, shouting, some cheering, some protesting. Edmund was on his feet, Thornhill pulling at his arm, both men clearly panicking. Sheriff Dalton was moving toward them, his expression grim. And through it all, the judge's voice rang out. This court is adjourned. The aftermath passed in a blur. People crowded around to congratulate them, to shake Cole's hand, to tell Lydia they'd believed her all along. Dr. Harrison appeared, giving Lydia a quick embrace and whispering, "You were magnificent." Sheriff Dalton informed them that Edmund would be held pending the prosecutor's investigation, that formal charges would likely be filed within days. Edmund himself was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about injustice and corruption, about how this wasn't over, how he'd appeal to every court in the territory. But his words had lost their power. He was just a bully being held accountable at last, and his threats rang hollow. Outside, the sun was shining despite the morning's gray skies. Lydia stood on the steps of the town hall, breathing an air that tasted like freedom. Cole stood beside her, his arm around her waist, anchoring her to this new reality. "It's over," she whispered, still unable to fully believe it. "It's over," Cole confirmed. "You're free, Lydia, truly free." Blackwood joined them, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "That went better than I hoped." The judge saw right through Carver's lies. "With any luck, he'll be in prison for a long time." "I can't thank you enough," Lydia said. "Both of you. You saved my life." "No," Blackwood corrected gently. "You saved your own life. We just helped you tell your story." He tipped his hat. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a 2-hour ride home, and I'm not as young as I used to be. Cole, Mrs. Maddox, it's been an honor." They watched him ride away, then turned to find half the town still lingering, as if they couldn't quite believe the drama was over. Mrs. Henderson, the severe woman who'd judged Lydia so harshly that first day, approached with an expression that might have been contrition. "Mrs. Maddox, I owe you an apology. I jumped to conclusions about you, believed gossip and appearances over truth. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Lydia was stunned. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means a great deal." Others followed, offering apologies or support, inviting them to dinner, promising help if they ever needed it. The town that had seemed so hostile just days ago was revealing itself to be something else, a community that, once it knew the truth, stood on the side of justice. By the time Cole and Lydia finally made it back to the ranch, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. They sat on the porch, watching the light fade, both too exhausted to speak. The silence between them was comfortable, peaceful in a way Lydia had never experienced before. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "Now we live. We build the life we want. We make this ranch a real home." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes warm in the fading light. "If that's what you want?" "It is," Lydia said without hesitation. "I want to stay here, with you. Build something real and lasting." "Good." Cole smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face into something handsome. "Because I was hoping you'd say that." They sat there as the stars began to emerge, one by one, painting the vast Montana sky with points of light. Lydia felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again: peace. She was safe. She was free. She was home. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Lydia learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, the satisfaction of collecting eggs or mending fence, the beauty of watching sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. She learned to ride Daisy, though she fell off more times than she cared to count. She learned to shoot with increasing accuracy until she could hit 8 targets out of 10. But more than that, she learned about Cole. Learned that his silence wasn't coldness, but thoughtfulness. Learned that his gentleness wasn't weakness, but strength under perfect control. Learned that when he made a promise, he kept it, no matter the cost. And Cole learned about her, learned that she sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. Learned that she was funny when she felt safe enough to joke. Learned that she was brilliant with numbers and had a head for business that could transform the ranch's profits if given the chance. They worked side by side, building not just a ranch, but a partnership. And slowly, gradually, the fear that had defined Lydia for so long began to fade, replaced by something infinitely more precious: trust. One evening, about a month after the trial, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. Cole had moved back into the house, sleeping in the spare room, respecting the boundaries Lydia needed. But those boundaries had been shifting, the walls coming down brick by brick. "Cole," Lydia said suddenly, "that thing you said the first day we met, about not biting unless asked?" He looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Yes? I'm asking." Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm asking you to really be my husband, not just in name but in truth. I'm asking—" She stopped, gathering courage. "I'm asking if you could love me, because I know, I'm falling in love with you." Cole was very still. Then slowly, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. Lydia, I've been in love with you since you stood up to Edmund in our yard, since you refused to be afraid anymore. I've been waiting, hoping, praying you might feel the same way. I do, she whispered. I love you, Cole Maddox. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Edmund had tried to force on her. This was tender and patient and full of promise. This was a kiss between equals, between partners, between two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it. You gave me back my life, Cole. You gave me hope and freedom and love. How could I ever regret that? They held each other as the stars came out, two broken people who'd found in each other the missing pieces that made them whole. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with fear in her eyes had found something she never expected, a home, a partner, a love that would sustain her through whatever storms life might bring. News came a few weeks later that Edmund had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Lydia felt nothing when she heard, not satisfaction, not anger, just a quiet sense of closure. Edmund no longer had power over her. He was simply a man paying for his crimes, and she was free to forget him and move forward. Calvin Thornton was also investigated and found to have been involved in similar arrangements with other young women. His assets were seized, and he fled the country ahead of his own prosecution. Lydia thought of the women who might have been saved by her courage in speaking up, and felt grateful she'd chosen to fight instead of run. As autumn painted the valley in shades of red and gold, Lydia stood in the kitchen of the house that had become her home, preparing dinner while Cole worked outside. Through the window, she could see him repairing a section of fence, his movements efficient and sure. She watched him for a moment, feeling a surge of love so strong it made her breath catch. This was her life now. This was her choice, and it was more beautiful than any dream she'd dared to have during those long, dark years under Edmund's control. Cole came in as she was setting the table, bringing with him the smell of grass and horses and honest work. He kissed her cheek in passing, a casual gesture that spoke of comfort and familiarity. They'd been sharing the bedroom for 2 weeks now, their marriage finally complete in every way. And Lydia had discovered something wonderful. Intimacy with someone you loved and trusted was a gift beyond measure. "Smells good," Cole said, washing up at the basin. "Your recipe," Lydia reminded him. "I'm still learning. You're doing fine." He dried his hands and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "More than fine. You're perfect." Lydia leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "We should invite Judge Blackwood for dinner soon. Thank him properly." "Good idea. And Sheriff Dalton and Dr. Harrison." Cole rested his chin on top of her head. "Might as well make it a proper celebration." "Celebrating what?" "Us. Our life. The fact that we made it through hell and came out the other side." He turned her in his arms, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "The fact that I get to wake up every morning next to the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, but they were happy tears now. "I'm not brave. I was terrified every step of the way. That's what made it brave. You were scared, but you did it anyway." Cole brushed a strand of hair from her face with infinite tenderness. "You fought for your freedom, for your life, for us. That's the definition of courage." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the last light of day painted everything golden. Outside, the ranch stretched toward the mountains, 300 acres of possibility and promise. This was their kingdom now, built not on lies and fear, but on truth and trust and love. "Cole," Lydia said softly, "thank you." "For what?" "For answering my letter. For believing me. For standing beside me when the whole world seemed against us. For showing me that not all men are monsters, that love doesn't have to hurt." She rose on her toes to kiss him gently. "For giving me a home." "Darling," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion, "you gave me something too. You reminded me what it means to fight for something worth having. You brought life back into this house, laughter back into my days." He smiled, that slow, warm smile that never failed to make her heart skip. You gave me a reason to be more than just a rancher waiting out his days. You gave me purpose. They ate dinner by lamplight, talking about plans for the ranch, about whether they should expand the herd, about how the chickens were producing more eggs than they could use. Normal, ordinary conversation about normal, ordinary life. But to Lydia, who'd lived for so long in fear and chaos, normal was a miracle she'd treasure forever. Later, as they prepared for bed, Lydia caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the frightened girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach. This woman stood tall, her eyes clear and bright, her expression peaceful. This woman knew her own worth, knew she deserved love and respect and freedom. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, coming to stand behind her. "I was thinking about how far I've come, how different everything is now." She met his eyes in the mirror. "I came here expecting another prison. Instead, I found paradise." "Not paradise," Cole corrected gently. "Just life. Real life, with all its challenges and joys. But we'll face it together, and that makes all the difference." They climbed into bed, and Lydia curled against Cole's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. This was safety. This was home. This was love. "Cole?" she murmured, already half asleep. "Hmm? Do you remember what you said that first day? About not biting unless asked?" She felt him chuckle, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I remember. I have a new rule." "What's that?" "You can bite any time you want. No asking required." She tilted her head up to look at him, mischief dancing in her eyes. "Because I trust you completely, and because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Cole's answering smile was warm enough to melt her bones. "Is that so, Mrs. Maddox?" "That's so, Mr. Maddox." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Lydia kissed him back with all the passion and joy and gratitude in her heart. This was her life now, chosen, claimed, cherished. She was no longer running from nightmares. She was running toward dreams, with a man beside her who would never let her fall. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, witnesses to the love being built in that simple ranch house. And somewhere in the night, an owl called, its haunting cry no longer ominous, but simply part of the symphony of life. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with fear in her eyes had found something more precious than safety, more valuable than freedom. She'd found love, real, enduring, transformative love. And in finding it, she'd finally found herself. Their future stretched ahead, uncertain in its details, but certain in one crucial way. Whatever came, they would face it together. Cole and Lydia Maddox, partners in life and love, building something beautiful from the ashes of the past. And if sometimes Lydia still woke in the night, momentarily disoriented by happiness, Cole was always there to pull her close and remind her that this was real, that she was safe, that she was home. The cowboy had promised he didn't bite unless asked, but what he'd given her was so much more than she could have imagined. He'd given her the courage to heal, the strength to fight, and the love to bloom into the woman she was always meant to be. And that, Lydia thought, as sleep finally claimed her in the warm circle of her husband's arms, was the greatest gift of all.